You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. Well, hello and welcome to TFM's local watering hole for all the franchises outside of Star Trek, and I'm just one of your hosts, Matthew Rushingham, coming at you from Perdidia. Yes, another galaxy all together this week. I'm so excited that we're going to be here talking about Ahsoka that just wrapped up on Disney+. And, well, it's in the bylaws. You guys know it. So that means that the one and only Jedi Master John Mills of the Jedi Masters and AKA Aggressive Negotiations is here.
It's contractual at this point. It's a necessity. I'm not allowed not to. Please, everybody, he stole my Kyber crystals. I have to make it through this. Tell me where they are.
Oh, my gosh. Well, I think this is one of those things where, you know, we've been waiting for a long time as Star Wars fans to be able to see something like this and actually have it come to fruition finally on our television screens is pretty amazing. I'm just really jealous that I didn't get to see this mid-season episode on the big screen because they weren't, you know, showing it in my area, unfortunately.
They sold out in my area too fast.
Yeah. Oh, my gosh. But anyway, before we dive into everything, of course, thank you so much for listening. Just subscribe wherever you are listening to this, and that way you'll get all of the episodes as soon as they become available. You can follow us and interact with us. We would love that on social media. We're on that thing that used to be called Twitter at the 602 Club. We're on Instagram at the 602 Club TFM. You can also find us on Facebook with the entire network at facebook.com/TrekFM. You can find us over online at Trek.fm, and you can interact with listeners from all over the world in the Babel Conference, which is our listeners-only discussion group housed on Facebook. Just type Babel into the search field, and you'll be able to find us. And if you like what we do here on TFM, please go over to Patreon at patreon.com/TrekFM and become part of our team. Make sure that all of these shows keep coming to you each and every week. And so, well, John, anytime we're talking about a show, there's really just so much to talk about. And so I kind of just broke this up into different characters' journeys.
Yeah.
And so I figured, you know, why not start with the title character in Ahsoka and talk about her journey? And I found it very interesting that in some ways, the journey that we follow Ahsoka on is somewhat similar to that of what we got with Obi-Wan Kenobi in that show, in the sense that we have a Jedi here who is very unsure of themselves, is allowing past experiences to kind of hold them back, and this whole series is really, in many ways, for the title character, about getting them over the hump, you know, getting them over that feeling of even unintentional. Like, I don't even know if Ahsoka actually really knew that there was something holding her back in any way until, of course, she has her major experience with, you know, almost death. And so I was really pleased with the fact that, of course, the originator of the character, along with George Lucas, Dave Filoni, realized this character needs to move forward from where it was because of everything that they'd been through. And this was going to be about getting her from point A to point B. And I really thought that they did a fantastic job with that.
Unquestionably, her journey is vital, and it's tricky in so many ways because there's a lot of transference onto Ahsoka's character with what longtime fans wanted to happen with Luke's character. We're, in a sense, to go back to The Empire Strikes Back, we've now all gone through as a fan base, you know, that boy is our last hope. No, there is another. It wasn't Leia in this context. It was Ahsoka. And I think her journey is super important because, and let's keep the comparison here with Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan is dealing, with trauma. He has a very different sort of thing where he's withdrawn completely from everything. Ahsoka's withdrawn from being a Jedi, but she's still out there doing the Force's work, if you will. She's out there seeking Thrawn. She's out there. We know that she's been advising Luke. We know that she's been interacting with Mando and Grogu. She's still participating in life. She's not withdrawn to the point where she's not participating anymore. What she's walked away from is the idea of being a Jedi at all. And I think the most important part of her journey is that this is the lever by which Dave Filoni, Star Wars as a franchise, the storytellers as a whole, start to explore what exactly defines a Jedi. Is it being a part of the Order? Is it following the teachings of the Order? Or is it something deeper? Is it more about being in touch with the Force itself, as opposed to borrow a line from Palpatine, following the dogmatic, narrow views of the Jedi Order, right? Palpatine, there's the grain of truth in the lie in every little bit. And so I think it's really Ahsoka's journey is much more important to move Star Wars as a whole past how fans have perceived the Jedi over the last several decades into redefining what a Jedi truly is and finding out what it is to get back to the basics of that type of character. That's my 2 cents, at least.
Yeah, no, I think that you're right on target with that one. And because as you were talking, I was just thinking about the way in which, Obi-Wan in many ways is held back because of his relationship with Anakin, his fear that comes along from everything that happened to him. And of course, his fear, I think, in any way that he'll make the same mistake of, something happening that then something happens to Luke, right? And especially in that series. And I think it's really interesting here in, the Ahsoka series to watch that she's being held back in many ways because of her relationship with Anakin, her fear that she might one day turn into Anakin, or that she'll turn somebody else into an Anakin, right? I mean, that's the whole thing with Sabine, and why she stopped training her, and why their relationship kind of fell apart. And so I found that really interesting. And so then, of course, one of the biggest parts of this show is her finding herself in the world between worlds and living all these experiences in the Clone Wars with Anakin as the Force Ghost as her guide, to help her realize that she is more than just Anakin's apprentice. She is more than that person, and she will always have the lessons that he taught her, but that does not mean she has to fear necessarily being turned into him. She has made her own decisions, which has led down her own path, which is different than that of Anakin. And so I found that to be incredibly moving, that the lesson that she learns here is to take what was good from what Anakin taught her and learn the lesson of where he failed and where she can succeed by making different choices. And I thought that to be very interesting, because really, the greatest part about Star Wars here is that it does come down to one's choices. Who one chooses to be is who they will be, right? I know that sounds kind of stupid, but you know what I'm saying? Like, our choices define who we are.
Absolutely.
And that's exactly, I think, what, Anakin allows Ahsoka to finally learn this one final lesson. There
are 2 parts to that. One is that I also enjoy the fact that when Anakin is interacting with her in the world between worlds, that what he's really hammering home to her is his own shortcoming in, to encapsulate it the way it is in my brain, he's basically saying, I didn't actually train you just to be a Jedi. I trained you to be a warrior. And that's the problem. Yes. That's the issue right there. Is Anakin was a great warrior. Was he a great Jedi? Like, that's the debatable part. And then additionally, I think that as you're paring all of those things down and stripping it away, what it means, I think that it becomes difficult because this is a really subtle way of challenging the audience into turning it around and showing them that we've all been perceiving Jedi the wrong way. That it's always been about something different than the Star Wars we've been watching. That the Jedi embraced it too much. And we've talked about the problems with the Jedi and everything like that. But just to place it again in the idea that what's broken, Luke did his job of tearing it all down so that it could be rebuilt. We know where Luke's journey is going to take him. And that's why we have this hope transference to Ahsoka, is because she's the one that's going to hopefully show how it can be built up right. And so, I know I'm rambling at this point, but am I making sense?
Yeah, no, I think what you said there is so important because it goes to what Ahsoka tells Sabine, which is, being a Jedi is so much more than knowing how to wield a lightsaber. It comes to training your mind, training your body, being in the Force, trusting the Force, right? Being a warrior is a part of that because, in the end, Jedi are basically warrior monks. But that's only one piece of the puzzle. And like you said, that's exactly what she learns in the world between worlds. She has been holding on to this fear and this idea that she is only a warrior and not anything else. And Anakin helps her to be able to realize, no, you're not just a warrior. You are so much more than that. And part of that is that she has learned so much more because of the choice that she made, right? To walk away from the Order when she did. And that's allowed her to be able to, I think, have experiences and understandings with the Force that are truly interesting. Now, one thing I wanted to ask you is because part of this is where there's a little, it's not really incongruous with Rebels, but I think this is a really interesting thing. At the end of Rebels, she shows up as Ahsoka the White. But what we see here, and I think the reason that is because I don't know if Dave ever knew if he was going to get to tell this story.
He did not. You're right on the head.
The truth is I love that Dave has been allowed to go back and explain the way in which Ahsoka gets to that point, right? And I think that's what makes this show so beautiful. And again, that's there was this important moment for her to transcend her relationship with Anakin and her relationship with the Clone Wars and everything that happened to her to become fully who she's meant to be. And we needed to see that crucible, right? We needed to see that. And I love that Dave was allowed to finally do that with this story here. And of course, in this incredible way where, we get to have Hayden Christensen back with, Rosario Dawson, and we get to see the live action bit of Clone Wars there. So, I think all of that together is just an incredible gift to Star Wars fans who have been with the animation. And let me just say this one more time. I think this show goes to show animation is pivotal to Star Wars, and it's just as important as anything live action. And if you're not watching the animation, you're literally missing out on some of the very best of Star Wars Star Wars has to offer.
Yes.
And so I love that this show does that. And it's probably one of the reasons why this show is going to be more of a slow burn with ratings and stuff, because people are going to start watching this show and then they're going to realize, I need to go back and watch something else. In fact, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day. We got together. We were having a men's whiskey night, and we were talking about came around to Ahsoka. And he was like, yeah, I realized I think I need to go back and watch the Clone Wars. And I was like, you need to go back and watch the Clone Wars and then watch Rebels and then watch Ahsoka, because it will mean so much more to you if you do. And he's like, my daughter and I, we actually went back and we started Clone Wars, so we're on the train. And I was like, good, because like it's true, you really do need those things to make this show mean the most that it can possibly mean.
I agree, it makes the show mean the most that it can possibly mean. But where I commend the show is that these journeys still work. And I say they're still effective, especially that 5th episode, because the storytelling is strong enough. That 5th episode is pivotal specifically because bringing Anakin in is the linchpin move to tie it all together, and taking it out of the context of giving people a taste of what they can expect in the Clone Wars. It gives them a chance to revisit or at least see all of the stuff that happened between 2 and 3 that everybody, who didn't watch animation plugs into. But Anakin's presence raises the stakes of what Ahsoka's doing. It shifts the focus. It's not just another video game mission series. This is literally, we now see that there is the fate of everything on the line in her journey. That one episode, that one interaction really infuses everything in her journey with the weight of the world, because we suddenly realize how pivotal she is. I mean, we all knew that coming into it if we'd watched the series leading up to. But I think that episode in specific does a great job of pushing it over the line so that people who didn't watch it, like if you take that out of the equation, I think this show lands a lot flatter with people who didn't watch animation.
And I agree with you on that, because I think what it does is that it honors the Skywalker story in a way that, forgive me for saying, but the sequels never could and never did, because this shows how pivotal Anakin Skywalker still is to Star Wars, even when it's a story that is tangential to it, right? Like, but there's a clear delineation between Anakin Skywalker and Ahsoka Tano and everything that's happening. And so it's a one more way in which I think Dave is weaving the golden thread throughout all of Star Wars to make it one thing.
I will also put in there that one of the things I love most about it, and I have a friend, you lose touch over time, and you don't stay in as close contact as you would like. But I've known him since we were 14 years old, known him for a very long time at this point. And he wrote something to me in a letter many, many years ago. Kids, just so everybody knows, you used to write things on paper when you wanted people to read them because email wasn't a thing. Just putting it out there. And at least not for most people. So he wrote in a letter, and this is what the Anakin piece of Ahsoka's arc reminded me of and really affected me. Was he wrote one time that he believes that you can continue helping somebody even after you die. And so he knew he would help me for the rest of time. And obviously it's a sentiment that stuck with me forever. But what I love is that Anakin's place and journey in this has that very spiritual sense that just because they're gone doesn't mean they haven't stopped pulling for you, stopped cheering for you. You still have somebody on your side who's trying to help. And additionally, I heard, or I should say read, some complaint where people said, oh, well, why would Anakin appear to Ahsoka while Luke's over there building up his Jedi temple? Number one, we don't know that he didn't. That's just another story we haven't seen. Maybe he did. Who knows? But additionally, even if he never did, his story with Luke is resolved. Anakin's getting the moment with Ahsoka that he really wanted. The coming to terms, coming to peace. Luke got that with Vader. Luke's the one who brought him back that made his appearance in the world between worlds even possible, in a sense, right? That's how I look at it. Luke made this possible. So it's like, in a sense, Anakin, you could even reason out, doesn't really need to go back to Luke because Luke and him are cool. Like, things are good, sort of thing. And if Anakin doesn't even come back in the next in the next season of Ahsoka or whatever other project Ahsoka is going to be featured in, that's fine by me. Because his story with Luke is done to a large extent. And now his story with Ahsoka is as resolved as it needs to be. So I just wanted to inject that 2 cents in there.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. And again, I think you did a great job of showing the way in which the connection with Anakin and the Skywalker story all fits together really well. Absolutely. Luke got his moment with Anakin, and if he never showed up again, it would be okay. Do I think that was the case? No, I imagine those Force ghosts talking to Luke more than once, So, but I just appreciate that we get that moment because it is all about Ahsoka being able to transcend from one spot in life to the next. And, of course, transcending in the same way that Gandalf did to basically a different type of character. Like, she is more confident, more full of herself in the right way, more understanding of her place in the universe and her, role as a Jedi, and what I was most interested in, a couple of things that I think go with that. One, is that last fight that she has with Morgan Elsbeth, she ends up losing her shorter lightsaber.
Yeah.
So I'm very interested to see if she ends up building another one, or does she end up possibly building a different lightsaber so she only carries around one from now on. I'll be really interested to see that because I was surprised to see them, take away one of her lightsabers.
I was surprised to see Morgan Elsbeth die.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, well, okay. I wasn't expecting that one. But it wound up working really well. But what I really loved about that last thing is I think that people shortchanged Sabine through the entire series. But that last episode really was a payoff for her and her journey because the noble, heroic choice to say, no, I'm going to stay back and I'm going to help. She exhibited Jedi behavior in that moment. Sacrificing herself, number one, to make sure Ezra gets home. That was the whole point. He had to get home. And then she can get away, but she chooses to sacrifice that and possibly herself for the sake of helping Ahsoka. That in and of itself, that's a really great arc that pairs up and dovetails into that very nicely.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I definitely want to dive into that. I want to ask you one question just about the casting for Sabine. Natasha Liu Borodizio, I think that's how you'd say her name. But what did you think of her as Sabine? Did she bring her to life in the way that you would have wanted in the show? And then did you end up buying her as the character?
Not at first. Not at first, I did not. But as Sabine found herself, and I started to see more of the Sabine that I felt I knew, I think that she did bring it there. And I had to sort of rewind it in my brain and say, okay, much like Ahsoka, Sabine is at a point where I don't recognize her because she doesn't recognize herself at this point. And then once she gets back into the swing of things, I go, oh, okay, I see Sabine. And so I would say that the pivotal point for me actually was the duel with Shin, is where I felt I saw Sabine arrive in the series. And then to have it so heartbreakingly go to her making a terrible choice for, with Baylan's skull and everything. But that's about the point where I really felt that the character came to life and the performance started working for me. And I'll fault it. Fault is not the right word, but what I would fault is I think there was just some flow and some editing that could have been tightened to help out her performance. But then once that engine started revving, then I was there with her. And by the end of the season, I was like, okay, that's Sabine. I'm with her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I'm a little bit different. I felt like that she, to me, nailed the character pretty much right away. And part of that, I think, is I guess I just bought in immediately her indecisiveness of her place. And I thought, of course, the big thing of having made her, Ahsoka's apprentice and having there been a fallout and basically having to spend most of the season, building that story to where we truly understand it. But I really liked the actress. I just thought she did a great job of kind of bringing the brashness of Sabine and her boldness, but also her vulnerability to life really well. And I think I will 100% agree with you. I think it got stronger every single episode. I think that was definitely something that we agree on, in the sense that the performance for her only got better throughout each episode. So I really enjoyed that. And then, of course, I think the thing that kind of surprised everybody was this idea of, Sabine as a Jedi apprentice in the first place.
Yep.
And, her having the Force abilities, which, by the end of the season, we actually see her kind of unlock that ability that had always kind of been blocked. And I think part of that came down to Ahsoka finally confiding in her that I understand the decision you made, because there was only one person in life who understood the decisions I made, and even if he didn't, he stood by me the entire time. And I'm going to do that for you no matter what from now on. And I think that finally gave her the ability to let go, trust the Force, and kind of unlock that thing that's always been inside of her that she's never truly been able to access because of all of the turmoil and the struggle she's been through in life. And I thought that this was a fascinating thing to have happen. I think it's obviously pretty clear that Dave has probably been thinking about this for a long time. And I love the choice. I think it was a very interesting choice because we only know of one other Mandalorian Jedi in the first place, and that Mandalorian Jedi created the Darksaber. So to have this one be the second that we would see is fantastic.
Well, I just can't wait for her to find out about what happens to the Darksaber and how mad she's going to be when she finds out about that. And be like, what the heck?
Dang it, Bo!
Well, to borrow from the meme, you had one job. And I just what I enjoyed a lot about what they did with Sabine is, number one, all of that stuff I said before. Number two, they got an actress who was able to pull off the stunt choreography, which I think is pretty darn important here.
Agree.
But number three, those sneaky little rats with the establishment of Beskar, removing the need for Sabine to have the little shields that she had in Rebels, so that the audience that's coming to this show, who came to it via the other live action streaming series as opposed to animation, they laid the foundation for Beskar being Beskar with that little trick and removing the need for the little arm shields, which I thought was just a very slick sort of thing for them to do, because I think it winds up one less visual element for people to nitpick, as it were. Because I think it just gives the actress the opportunity to use her physicality. And I think they really had her use that physicality to great advantage in terms of the choreography and everything. But what you said about, Ahsoka saying, even if he didn't understand it, he stood by me. That's another thing. I know this rewinds a little bit, but that's another thing that I really like about the way Ahsoka uses Anakin to relate to Sabine. Is Ahsoka reminds us that Anakin was a good guy. He was actually a good, loving person for the most part. He was just broken inside and his emotions.
Well, and he was a good master.
Yeah, he was actually a good teacher. Like, I would love to hear somebody say, I'll stand by you no matter what decision you make. I might not understand why you're making that call, but so long as you're not going to kill every one of us, okay, I got your back. Like, that's the type of thing that somebody needs to hear to have that confidence. And, and Sabine needs to hear that.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree with you. And I think, it was a bold choice, I think, to do something unexpected. We talked about the idea in aggressive negotiations of unexpected things happening, like in Mandalorian, having Grogu show up. And this was, especially if you have seen the animated shows, completely out of left field, completely unexpected. And at the same time, we've seen Sabine having trained with a lightsaber before. We've seen her trained with a Jedi. Ezra even makes an allusion to that idea. And so I think those are things that are really interesting. And to see, Ahsoka take her under her wing and to help her find a part of herself that she didn't know was there. And again, unlock that potential. Because apparently Ahsoka did believe in her, that she had that ability, and helped her find that was really, really cool. And like you said, who wouldn't want somebody in their life to believe in them in a way that helps them truly unlock their greatest potential? And I think that just kind of goes to show, it brings me all the way back to the original Clone Wars movie where Anakin tells Ahsoka, you wouldn't have made it as Obi-Wan's Padawan, but you just might make it as mine. And, Sabine probably wouldn't have made it as anybody else's Padawan, but she just might make it as Ahsoka's. And I think that, again, you can see the ties that bind, right, between Ahsoka and Anakin, but you could also just see the ways in which she ties to other Jedi, whether it's Plo Koon or Obi-Wan Kenobi. Like, there's all of these connections that this character has, and she's living them out. And I think it's just, it makes for an incredibly cool story.
As cool as another example of incredible mentorship that we see in the series, and that is Thrawn and Morgan Elsbeth. Thrawn really motivates Morgan to just go to that next level and achieve something that nobody would think was possible and travel to another galaxy. Of course, I'm jokingly putting it in a very positive light, but, I think that Star Wars has a history of highlighting that sort of balance between teacher and student. And I know that the very obvious one to go for would be to look at Baylan and Shin, because you have just like in episode 1, you have your evil master and apprentice over here, and you have your good master and apprentice over here. And you see how they sort of compare and contrast in their styles and everything. But Thrawn, in a sense, is the ultimate teacher to everybody, because he manipulates every last person in this series into doing exactly what he wants and he needs them to do, even when they don't realize that they're doing it. Like, Thrawn coming in this way into this series and having the first ever live action Thrawn a dream that has been in the brains of Star Wars fans since the early 1990s, for Pete's sake. You know, I know I say it jokingly, but isn't like Thrawn the ultimate teacher here? Because he keeps laying out for everybody, this is how you do things. And then they wind up doing what he wants, or they wind up being leveraged into doing what he wants. You know, like he always gets what he wants out of it. So there's this evil professor nature to him that I think is even greater than anything we saw in the animated series.
Well, and I think the thing that really struck me about Thrawn's journey here is the way in which, you know, in Rebels, he was completely flabbergasted by the supernatural. You know, with Bendu, with the Jedi, he even talks about, one Jedi thwarting his plans, mainly Ezra. So what I love here is that you see him come to a place to which he has nothing and find a way to adapt himself to the situation he's in. But he also adapts himself by embracing the supernatural as a part of his plan, because he's the one who woke up the Dathomiri Great Mothers. He's the one who used them to contact Morgan Elsbeth, who is his plant in the, quote unquote regular Star Wars galaxy. You know, he's the one who has now been able to take into account the abilities of a Jedi and not take them for granted. So what we've seen here is not only a man who is able to learn about his enemy, but he's able to learn about his own shortcomings and work to correct them. And I think that's what makes him terrifying now, is because, it seems as though intentionally this has been about getting Thrawn to be the Thrawn we knew from the Heir to the Empire books, where he had allied himself with Jor Sabath and, understood, the ways in which the Jedi could be a threat to him and all of those type of things. But it's been a progression about getting Thrawn to that point as well, which Dave never taking anything for granted and actually showing instead of telling us things. And so to be on the journey with Thrawn in that is fantastic.
It is. And it's fantastic. And one of the most lovely touches, I think, is seeing the way that he has constructed a cult, basically. That Thrawn,
yes,
he sees things. When we see him in Rebels, he doesn't understand the Force. He doesn't accept it. He does, those sorts of things. This is crazy. This is dumb. This, I can't get my. And now he just says, okay, all right, well, this is just a factor that I didn't plan on. All right, so how do I adapt to this? And he has a devoted following that he's kept going for some time. He has trusted lieutenants. He doesn't rule through fear the way that Vader did, or the Emperor. He rules through loyalty and devotion to him. And he's willing to make alliances, like you said, with the Dathomiri witches. And I think that you're absolutely right. And where I'm a little heartbroken is with Baylan's skull. I thought we would eventually get to the place where he would be the Jeruis Sabath character that would be by Thrawn's side, that he would have to keep in check, that would go nuts and become the X factor that would wind up ruining it all for him. I also think it's a shame that we're not going to get Rook. We already got Rook, but that was a function of the fact that we got him because, again, Filoni never thought that he was going to get to tell this story in this way.
Sure.
So we have to adapt. And so he has Enoch, right? That's how you pronounce it? Or is it Enoch?
Enoch.
Enoch? See, I want to say Enoch, but I've always been corrected because I always want to say Gringotts instead of Gringotts, and my daughter always corrects the heck out of me for that. So it's just me.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you bring up Enoch, I mean, you think of the fact that Enoch is one of the only characters in Scripture who doesn't die. Enoch is the undying one. Mm-hmm. He's the leader of Thrawn's undying troops who seem to be held together by the power of the Dathomiri witches. And, you know, you've got these night troopers as well. And so I think all of that, again, just goes to show this character who is willing to make deals with the devil at this point to get what he wants. And you almost know as well, if this is Thrawn, he has to have a plan for also taking them out at some point when he doesn't need them anymore, which I think is also fascinating because, you know, that's who this character is. So, no, I mean, I think I think one of the things I appreciate is Dave taking the ideas of the Heir to the Empire series and giving us just enough of it. But also, of course, we're in this place where we don't know what's going to happen, which, you know, it's the adaptation thing. And you want to make sure that you're doing it in a way that appeases fans, but also gives them something to which they can't predict so easily.
But I always get it. It's so interesting to me that Thrawn himself says, you know, for the Empire. And this is going to sound weird, but now more than ever, the question is, what exactly does that mean anymore? Because the Empire was about devotion to Sidious, to Palpatine. Is this some sort of lever by which they know, do the Dathomiri have any aims on bringing Palpatine back? Because obviously we're already talking about reanimating the dead. What are we talking about here? Like we've now opened up this doorway, all of these possibilities about things that can happen. And they've been transported back to the galaxy in which we know things are going to happen in another couple of decades. So it's pretty wild. Like we've now, I hate the term and I make fun of the term subvert expectations, because I think that Thrawn's journey is an example of how you meet or exceed expectations, the way you would write in an employee evaluation, where he has a goal. We know what his goal is, but we don't know what that goal means. And we know from just this series, this season, that there is something additional. There's some additional meaning behind what he's going for. Oh, he's coming back and it's for the Empire. Okay, but what does the Empire mean at this point? And the fact that he's caught off guard by the fact that Baylan Skoll goes off on his own. And he's been used. Baylan Skoll has now used Thrawn to get what he wants. And that takes Thrawn off guard. So, like, that's really fascinating. Because that shows, regardless of where that goes or resolves or anything like that, we've now already been shown that Thrawn can be outsmarted. It doesn't cost him anything right here, but Thrawn can be outsmarted. And as awesome as it is to see him and see him in play in live action and all that stuff, we've now been given that little seed. That little seed has been planted that Thrawn is not infallible, that there are things that he misses.
Yeah, I think to go to your question specifically, Thrawn says, for the protection of our galaxy. Mm-hmm. And one of the things from the EU was always the idea that the Emperor had a reason for taking over, and it wasn't just for his own power, but as consolidation of power so that they would be able to fight a force that was coming, and that was, of course, the Yuuzhan Vong. And we know from, Clone Wars panels that have happened, Dave talking about the idea that the Yuuzhan Vong were going to be a part of the Clone Wars in some way, They had, drawings for them and doodles and stuff like that, story ideas. So I am wondering if that is Thrawn's focus, is trying to protect the galaxy, that galaxy, from the Yuuzhan Vong. Specifically, too, you have to remember is that, the Chiss part of the galaxy is also a part of that galaxy. It's difficult to get to, but it's still a part of that galaxy, and therefore he would want to protect his own world, his own worlds, from an invasion like that as well. So I have no idea if that's the truth or if that's going to happen. But to me, them throwing in that line seems to indicate that Thrawn, for the Empire, that's what that means to him. Is that so? And we do know from the books that are canon, at least right now, that Zahn wrote that have Thrawn in them. One of the reasons for him joining the Empire was for that specifically.
Yeah.
For figuring out what was going on out there and for this threat that they felt was coming, kind of thing. So I think all of that could be definitely part of this, and who knows where we'll go, but it makes for fun speculation. I just wanted to ask you a couple things about the Dathomiri specifically.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that we get the Dathomiri mothers, we find out that they originate in another galaxy, and basically, too, the interesting thing is we had 3 of them. They have the thread of fate. They're basically the fates from great Greek myth. Man, I just love the way that Filoni, like George Lucas, loves to play with these type of archetypes and bring them into Star Wars and utilize them for their own storytelling.
Yes, I agree. I'll throw on top of that they're also like the 3 witches from Macbeth. And that's how I see them more than even the fates from Greek myth. I see them quasi betraying Thrawn in a similar fashion. Macbeth cannot be killed by anybody born of a woman. I'm invincible. Macduff was from his mother's womb untimely ripped. Oh, crud. Like, I see them playing that sort of role here, and they're literally Shakespearean in that sense to me. You're right about the thread of fate. I'm not saying it's not mutually exclusive. I think that it's multi. There are many angles from which this is coming, and theater nerd like me, yes, it's wonderful. It's to sit there and just be like, yay, and get that. And on top of that, having the Dathomiri mothers in there at all. Name to me another live action series that has so embraced the idea that there are multiple ways to express the Force and embrace the Force and follow the Force. It's crazy how expansive everything just became in the live action universe, up to and including Ezra now initially refusing his lightsaber, right? Because Sabine offers it, and Ezra refusing it at first is basically Ezra saying, that's not necessarily, I don't really need that right now. It's okay. Like, how amazing is that? Because not only do I not know what Ezra's been up to, why Thrawn didn't pummel the crap out of whatever region he was living in, or try to hunt him down before this moment, or did he, like all of that sort of story stuff that I know is still out there for us to tell. But like, the Dathomiri mothers and Ezra, again, show us 2 ways of living with the Force. And what I love is that fear is the wrong word. But one of the possibilities always was that when you start talking about the Yuuzhan Vong, there was no Force to them. They were sort of like Force exceptions sort of thing. To go to this other galaxy and find out that the Dathomiri witches are there and that Ezra can still call on the Force expands the Force into more than just a sci-fi, it's part of that galaxy concept to, no, it's a part of everything. Everything concept. Sorry to ramble about that too, but like, I think Ezra is an important counterbalance to the Dathomiri mothers as well.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I think one of the beauties of Ezra's journey is watching him, having found the Noti, I think is how you'd say that, these beautiful little,
I call them
cross
fraggles.
between. Yeah, that's
They're
basically
fraggles.
what they look like. But like you said, living life without a lightsaber, living life with only the Force. He even says the Force is my ally. He has learned to, I think, in some ways, be what a Jedi was meant to be. Baylan calls him one of the Boken Jedi trained in the wild during the Dark Times. And so they are, we've talked about this on Aggressive Negotiations, the way in which we felt like Kanan and Ezra basically became the Jedi were meant to be.
Yep.
Kanan being able to have attachment without it ruining his life, being able to have a relationship with somebody like Ezra without it ruining his life, and them fully being able to embrace their missions in a way that was incredibly beautiful and fulfilling, and yet they still actually got to have real lives, right? And so I think all of that was fantastic. And then, speaking of lightsabers, watching him build a lightsaber that looked almost exactly like Kanan's just had me completely choked up, because it was just an incredibly beautiful moment to have there. And then, of course, when, Huang tells him, I trained Caleb and I taught him how to build a lightsaber, and there were 2 of these, and I've kept this one. And it was just this incredibly beautiful moment. And again, it brings all of the stories together in a powerful, powerful way. And it's all encapsulated in the journey that Ezra's been taking.
And part of that journey is so beautiful because the casting of Ezra, I think, is
perfect.
They nailed it so perfectly,
Yep.
and it was so key. His voice, his look, his physical mannerisms. I immediately, I said, and this is no disrespect to the actress, while it took me time a little bit to get there with Sabine, and I acknowledge that part of that is because she was working through a thread where she was coming from a place where I had to experience her where she wasn't fully herself yet. Ezra, we fast forward past all of that part, and all I could see was, okay, that's Ezra. There he is. He is live on screen. That's him. I fully accept it. And he even looks a little like his dad, which is pretty cool. But the whole Ezra thing, to your point about, I trained Caleb and I held this just in case he ever needed one. Well, of course he didn't. Or at least he couldn't ask for it. There's an echo, I think, that most might miss, in that Luke's saber in Return of the Jedi looks like Obi-Wan's. Ezra building a saber that looks like Kanan's is an echo of that. And I found that to be particularly beautiful, whether it was intentional or not. Even though the line in Return of the Jedi is much like your father's, and I think it was a leftover from when they had fake scripts laying around and all of that stuff to lead people away from the idea that Vader was his dad. I think it's a very neat parallel that you wind up making a saber that is an echo of your teacher. I don't know that I saw that with Sabine, though. Her saber didn't really look like an echo of Ahsoka's. So,
well, and that's because her saber was given to her by Ezra.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So, yeah, she hasn't had a chance to build one yet.
That's right. So hers, if she builds one, will wind up see?
Yeah, most likely.
But those are the beautiful
Which brings
visual
the
cues.
whole question of, does Ahsoka get to build a new lightsaber kind of thing? And so, yeah, it's great.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, but those are the beautiful sort of little visual winks that mean so much to a longtime fan. And that's why I was so happy to see it.
Well, and I think the beauty is, too, just watching Ezra be able to be reunited with Ahsoka, who had told him to find her when he could. And then, at the end of the show, to have him reunited with Hera, which is his space mom, was incredibly powerful. And so to watch his journey, I think the one thing that this season does in so many ways is to really set us up to be excited about what's coming next for Ezra in, whether it's Ahsoka season 2 or whether it's, whatever they end up doing. I can't wait to see what's next because, I think you are 100% right. The casting for him was just absolutely perfect, and I want more of him, which, in all honesty, I felt like with Hera's journey and the casting of her with a Mary Elizabeth Winstead, who is also married to none other than Ewan McGregor,
who's
so
none other
it's all
than
in the family.
Than the nephew of Dennis Lawson.
Exactly. So it's all in the family here, but man, I thought she did a great job of pulling off Hera in a way that made her completely believable. And there was just this twinkle in her eye that she had. This, I loved her as Hera. I thought she was great. And I'm a huge critic because Hera is actually one of my favorite all-time Star Wars characters.
Same.
And so I thought she did such a great job.
I agree. And I think she got her vocal inflections and her speech patterns right. It doesn't need to be the exact same voice, but she got the manner of speaking correct. I think that Mary Elizabeth Winstead did her homework, knew the cadence by which Hera should speak, and also got the body language right, which is a weird thing to say because Hera's animated before this, but the way she would stand was very much the way that Hera would stand. I believe that was Hera. And also, I think that moments where she shined included when she would interact with Carson. And that was the Hera interacting with somebody else that I'm used to. And whether it was Hera interacting with Lando or Hera interacting with, anybody, that's the Hera that I saw. And as silly as this might sound, Hera and the way she interacted with Chopper. That was Hera and Chopper.
Yeah.
And
keep your lid on, Chop.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still laughing about where Chopper is looking for the homing beacon, and he's sitting there and you can tell what he's saying is like, did you move my stuff? It's just like, no, just fine. It's like somebody moved my stuff. He does that little like hands on his side sort of move where he's like, you can tell he's saying, he's like, somebody was in here and somebody moved my stuff. Oh, there it is. Right. Like, the way she interacted with Chopper was the biggest selling point for me between the two of them, and very key to making that character work.
Well, and I think, on top of that, one of the things that we see her, she's very similar to what we saw. She's still somebody who's willing to break the rules if she thinks it's the right thing. She's willing to thumb authority if she feels like it needs to be done. Her friction with the New Republic, the way in which, she has this relationship with Mon Mothma who's trying to cover for her, but there's only so much the Chancellor can do because they're a government of laws, and what I was most interesting is watching Kaz's father from Star Wars Resistance be such a complete and utter tool in this show, which is one of the places where, this show subtly lets you know where this series is going the Star Wars series in general, where what happened with the New Republic is already started, where we're not willing to take seriously the threats that are coming, and we're not willing to be serious in that way about galactic safety.
Yes.
And Hera, of course, being on the forefront of like, no, we've got to make sure that if there's any chance, that we're doing everything we can to make sure that chance doesn't come to fruition.
Yes, I never watched the entire run of Resistance, so there's that being Kaz's father. All I know is that he is a good character to act as what I think George Lucas would have had as, forgive the language, the type of douchebag that would ensure that the First Order would be able to rise, because he would be sniffing his own farts and unable to see past his own ego. So he's very effective with that. And I really enjoyed the idea that what they laid out there was that it's one thing to fight against the government. It's another thing to govern. And that is a very difficult thing, and it's where a lot of revolutions fall apart. And I like and appreciate the fact that we're seeing the revolution having a hard time taking over and running things, because they suddenly find out, how are you going to pay the bills? How are you going to keep things running? How are you going to make sure that everybody's lights stay on, that it's not glamorous, and that you're going to have people? And what I like about him is that he takes the place of, if you want to get back to the Heir to the Empire sort of stuff and the other 1990s expanded universe stuff, he takes the place of Borsk Felia, who was the douchebag from that era.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, a character you love to hate.
Yeah, until finally in Star by Star, he gets what he deserves. But, whatever. It's cool.
Yeah. So, a couple of other characters that are really important to talk about are Baylan and Shin and their journey. Mm-hmm. And I found them to be utterly fascinating. And part of that is because their paths diverge. And mainly, like you mentioned earlier, is that Baylan has been using this whole thing to get to this place because he is somebody who apparently is a student of the stories of the Jedi. The same type of stories that Huang was, telling Ahsoka, and he believed them. And one of those stories seems to specifically be about the Mortis gods. And the fact that we, see him on an Argonath of the father right next to the son and the daughter whose face has been destroyed, I think it's fascinating. And because he even says to Shin that what he longs for is not power that would come from what Thrawn is trying to do, but he seeks to bring an end to the cycle of war fully. Mm-hmm. And it makes me wonder, is what he's after this idea of bringing balance the same way the father offered Anakin to do? Is that where he thinks he's going?
I think that he might think that, but I see him as a very, and I mean this as an ultimate compliment, a very Dooku type of character. Dooku's goals you could understand in a sense. Dooku wanted to end the corruption and ineptitude of the Republic. He honestly wanted there to be more order and seriousness and focus to everything. And it became an obsession, and it led to, hijinks. I see Baylan in the same light. Baylan, like any other idealist who has had their heart broken, like Saw Gerrera, what he wants, what he believes he wants, is not a bad thing. But he's going about it completely the wrong way. And he's so blinded by it that he's willing to make those little compromises and say, yeah, I know this is not the right way to do it, but it's what's got to be done. You can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs. I think that, if anything, where I see him going is he's getting a call where he thinks he can be imbued with the ability to end Thrawn, end the like basically, I think he wants to usher in a golden age that where, again, and here's the flaw with the thinking, the right people can run everything. That's always the downfall. Oh, this revolution is so the right people can run everything. Because the people who are running it are bad. Everybody can agree on that one. Everybody sucks. Everybody in the pulling the levers of power, they're terrible and they're selfish. But then who do you quote unquote replace them with? And is it an improvement? I think Baylan is chasing after this idea that he knows the right way that things should go. And he will, but you know what? Let me throw this out there to you. Do you think it's possible that Baylan is a nihilist? That he wants to wipe it all out? There's almost a part of me that wonders, is he the one that's thinking the only way for this to be peaceful is for everything to get leveled?
That's an interesting question. I think, honestly, this is my guess as to what's happening, is that it's actually the son, not the father, that has tempted him here. And that he has been promised this thing that, to which he has always longed. Like he said, he loved the idea of the Jedi, but not them in action, basically. And so, to me, that's where I see this going. And I think you're bringing in the idea of him basically being like a Dooku type character who gets so wrapped up in his own ideology that he can't see the forest for the trees, and then, ends up getting himself destroyed, is exactly what's going to happen. Because, and part of that is, what I find interesting is that Shin and Baylan are two sides of the same coin of people who try to pursue power. She just wants power for power's sake. She wants to be able to rule. She's tired of being on the run. That's what I got out of her. Whereas Baylan, on the other side, wants a power to be able to control everything, but to use it to make it better. And so it's the two sides of the same coin, and I just found that really interesting in that master-apprentice relationship.
See, I see Shin a little bit differently than you do. I see Shin as more like Anakin than Dooku. In that Shin, I know nothing about her history, but the way that she's played comes across to me as somebody who Baylan took under his wing, but her motivation was that she wants to have the power not to feel helpless or pain. Like, she doesn't have a grandiose plan. I don't see her having a grandiose plan. I see her having a smaller scale plan, the ability to control her own fate. Because when we get along, he has to say to her at one point, "I've trained you to be more than this." I think, to your point, if Baylan is tempted by the son, maybe he sees Shin as taking the place of the daughter, or he sees himself as the father and her as the daughter, and whomever else as the son, right? And what I love about this entire discussion is it has nothing to do with Death Stars. It has nothing to do with Death Star technology. It has nothing to do with Star Destroyers with Death Star guns. It has everything to do with this mind-blowing, wild concept that you're going to step into a reality beyond our reality, beyond anybody's reality, where you will have the fate of everything, including the midichlorians, under your control. Like, this is Star Wars getting weird, really weird. And Star Wars is awesome when it's weird.
Yes. I could not agree with you more. And I think that's what made that ending with both of them so incredibly fun, especially with Baylan, where he's talked about this idea of this power that he has felt, that he's been alluding to this whole season. And now to find out what that is just blows my mind. And I can't wait to see what comes next with that, because, I think it's going to be awesome in that. And so, and I thought, the hardest part about this too is that, unfortunately, Ray Stevenson has died. And for me, I think his story seems to be important enough that they're going to end up having to recast him.
We've gone back and forth on that.
We have, behind the scenes, yes.
Behind the scenes, we've gone back and forth on that. And all I will say is that I will trust them to make a decision that makes the most sense for the story.
Yes, I agree.
But it would not be the first time that I have been in love with a property where tragedy befell. Mm-hmm. And they wound up having to transfer somebody's story arc to someone else. And that's okay by me, because so long as you can find a way to convey the point of that story arc. But I'm also not opposed to recasting roles. For instance, and I think you and I disagree on this, I like Maggie Gyllenhaal in The Dark Knight more than I liked Katie Holmes in Batman Begins.
Well, I mean, everybody liked Maggie Gyllenhaal more than they liked Katie Holmes. So.
I always have trouble remembering who, but there is someone that I'm connected to that really disagrees with me about that one. So,
I mean, I never personally loved Maggie Gyllenhaal or either of them, but I thought Maggie Gyllenhaal was way better. Anyway, that's totally different.
Totally different thing. Yeah. Basically, just to say, recasting works. It's fine. But of course, it also opens up the whole other thing is, why can't we just go ahead and recast Luke and Leia at this point? Like, when is it going to be okay to do that and necessary to do that? But, different side.
Well, I think that, one of the things on this is that, the same thing, of course, Michael Gambon just passed away and terribly sad. But, he replaced Richard Harris as Dumbledore,
That's true.
And Dumbledore was, of course, a character you had to have. And so that'll be really interesting in this. Is this a character where Dave has to have them for the story? Or is it something like you said, where you could transfer to another character? And that's just the question that only Dave can answer. So,
or you could have something happen where he has to wear a mask.
Yeah, okay. There you go. Could happen.
Right? So, problem solved right there.
I wanted to ask you about the production of this show, because we've talked about all of these Disney Plus shows at this point. And, we have definitely been up and down with the production, all the way from... with our complaints about Kenobi and or the Book of Boba Fett, to our praise for something like The Mandalorian when it's been really good, or of course Andor. And so where did Ahsoka land for you here with, its production value?
Overall high marks. There were moments where the volume exhibited its limitations, and that's okay. Because there are certain things that you cannot do practically, whether it's rendering a purple forest. I know it wasn't purple, but it was that sort of like magenta-ish, purple-ish sort of thing. So there are locales that cannot exist outside of, a soundstage. So that's fine. But there are things that work really well, like space hyenas, which are my new favorite thing, and I want one like now. And I'm not talking about the toy. I want a space hyena. I'll be very disappointed if I don't get one for Christmas, as a matter of fact. Because that's the type of whimsical Star Wars sort of thing that I love most of all is those sorts of, or the Fraggles or whatever they're called, the little rock creatures.
The Noli.
Yeah, Fraggles.
Or the Noti, excuse me.
The Fraggles.
Yeah.
Overall, I thought the production was really good. I would never eat on a table that came out of the floor because my feet were just on that.
Same.
And what kind of savage is doing this? This is not a bit either. This goes back to when I saw The Force Awakens. Matt, you can attest to this. I was aghast at the fact that Rey chewed with her mouth open. Come on, table manners matter even if you're growing up in a hollowed out AT-AT in the middle of the desert. This matters, folks. I thought that was such a neat, cool thing where it's like, oh, the table comes out of the floor. And it wasn't until like 2 seconds into it where I was like, oh my God, they eat off of that. No, I can't allow that. Have it come from the ceiling or something. That's the only way
it's a
that can work.
self-cleaning floor.
No, it's in my head at that point. Like I can't get it out of my head. But production value wise, overall, I thought this show was like a solid 4.5 out of 5 sort of thing. There were certain things where the limitations of the volume, the depth wasn't there that I wanted, but that's okay because if doing that meant I got the show as opposed to not getting the show because it would have been too expensive, okay. And as Star Wars fans, we always love to cite that Lucas himself says, oh, the story is what has to work and the effects are secondary. Well, that's true. Then I'm not going to harp on the effects. So overall, I thought they were fantastic. There were some shortcomings here and there, but What about you?
Yeah, I thought that this was a great show in production value. I thought that they did a very good job. I like you. Obviously, there are some limitations, I think, that come in. And part of that happens to be the volume. And, there are places where, when you're doing this type of show, you're not able to just go and shoot anywhere, to get the live action plates or anything. You're on a stricter budget, so that's going to happen. And yet, I loved the whimsy of this show, the way it brought references to things like, of course, Lord of the Rings. We talked about the Dark Crystal. I thought, the bringing to live action of Huang and the T6 shuttle was phenomenal. Bringing the Purgle into live action, again, phenomenal stuff. Like, looked so good. And I thought that they did a really good job with the look of this show. I thought that it felt very similar to what you would want to see. I was really impressed for the most part. And, that's something that's really important, I think, with these Star Wars shows because, Star Wars set the bar for what things look like. Of always pushing the boundaries and trying to do it really well. And I think this show did a great job. I think all of the directors did a great job of bringing the episodes to life. And the cinematography in the show looked really good. I thought the lighting specifically was really well done.
Yeah.
And I think all of that really helped. And so, yeah, to me, the production value of the show was very strong. Keying on something that you said, the weakest moments, visual effects, compositing, rear screen projection wise, whatever, of this show are stronger than Mandalorian Season 3 or Book of Boba Fett. And I think that's important to note because they're relatively contemporaneous. And so the decisions made for this series, I think, are stronger than some of the decisions made for those 2 seasons of those shows.
And I think it shows a very thoughtful aspect, but also an aspect of some attention to detail that was taken that was very necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Some lessons learned, as it were.
The music here in this season is by Kevin Kiner, who, of course, did the music for the Clone Wars and the Bad Batch, and so very familiar with all of these characters. And what did you think of, his take here, specifically giving us a lot of, I would say, Kurosawa-influenced music, as well as some beautiful renditions of themes we heard in Rebels, as well as the Clone Wars?
Loved it and was completely sold. I read some reactions where people didn't care for it, but when in the very first episode, when Baylan's walking down the hall, having his own Murder Express moment, and we have those discordant piano strikes happening while he's walking through, I thought it was a very bold choice, and I was immediately hooked on the music. And this is one of those rare series where I wasn't waiting for a stinger, but I would let the end credits play because I was enjoying the music enough.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think, one of the beauties of Kiner is the fact that he completely understands Star Wars. He understands its music. But he also understands pushing the music of Star Wars because he's been doing it since the Clone Wars began. And that's what George was asking for. And I think he 100% delivered it. And so I think the music here was fantastic because I think in many ways it fits exactly the type of things that Dave is interested in. The same way that the music fit what George was interested in when he wanted it, but then what he wanted for the Clone Wars, right? Like, again, it's all working together here, and I thought he did a really good job because I thought it was a great mixture of the things that we have heard before and know from before, but at the same time creating something that felt very real and right for this show. And part of that is that you actually, if you've seen Rebels, you've seen the Clone Wars, what you are going to want as a fan, you are going to want a mixture between all of those things. And I think the beauty is that Kiner delivers. He even delivers in that scene where we go to Coruscant. There's going to be the Senate hearing, and the music there is reminiscent of things you would have heard in the prequels.
Yep.
When you're on Coruscant. So it's like the guy gets it, and that's what you want. So one last question for you, John, is the question of ending on this cliffhanger where Ezra has made it home, but Sabine and Ahsoka are left in the other universe. And like how do you feel about that? Do you feel like you want a season 2? Do you want this to move into a movie? What are you kind of feeling now? Search your feelings.
Whatever they're going to give me, I want it as soon as they can deliver it. Let's cut the foreplay here. Let's just get to it. Okay. I don't want to dance around it. I don't want endless articles for 6 months about what they're thinking of doing. You know what? This strike, you had time to think through it. Tell me what type of project you want next and make it happen, because let's get there. Because I don't want the iron to cool on this one. I want to go for it. I want to go for it big. I want to go for it as quick as I can. If you asked me would I prefer a movie versus a season of of the show, honestly, I'd love another season. specifically because I'd get more time to develop things. A movie, you have 2 hours, and you have to take into account that there might be people who didn't watch this. That's tough for me. I enjoyed spending time with Thrawn. I enjoyed spending time with Sabine and Ahsoka and Ezra and everybody else. Please, I think that contrary to the MCU, Star Wars has figured out how to make episodic television work. I'm okay with sticking here. But I will take whatever they want to give to me. That's where I stand.
I find myself in the same position as you. You know, I'm willing to take whatever they give me. I think that the thing that I would like most, in all honesty, like you, is to have it be another season of television, and for the same reason that you want that, right? Which is, I think that's that would be the most fulfilling way to see the next part of this story, because I feel as though we need another season to be able to get us to the point where you would jump off into a film, because I don't see how a film does a great job in a couple of hours of telling the story of what Ahsoka and Sabine are up to, on top of where, you know, we are with Ezra and the New Republic. And so I feel like the next season needs to kind of bring us back all together, so then we could bring it into a film. But at the same time, I just want more of this story. So please, just give me more of the story, and I'll be happy. So, John, I am very interested to see then where you will land on your ratings for Ahsoka.
It's honestly a tough call, because those first couple of episodes, I was a little dicey. Like, I enjoyed them, but I was like, okay, you know, sort of finding our way sort of thing. But you cannot undervalue a strong ending. I'll make a Star Wars reference here. Whatever problems anybody might have had with the Phantom Menace up to a certain point, once the doors open and Darth Maul is standing there, everybody was all in. This series is much the same way, where there might be quibbles I have here and there, but once a certain threshold was reached, I was all in and going away. There's a thing where you get inside your own head and you say to yourself, well, I don't want to give it this because I'll feel too much like a fanboy. Or I don't want to give it this because I'll feel like I'm too much trying not to be a fanboy. But you know what? In all honesty, I'm okay being a fanboy here. Because while the ending was, there were things that could have been done better in the first 3 episodes or so. Once I hit episode 5, it was must-see TV for me. I had to see it the minute it was released, or as close to as I could. So I'm going to wind up giving it a 4.5, with a possibility it could go up to a 5. 4.5 from me.
Yeah, I like the way you put that, because I do think that there are a couple of things here and there where, you know, I think I might have done, I might have done things differently, or, you know, whatever. But at the same time, I find myself being with you that this is just a great series. And I really enjoyed it, you know? Like, I had such a good time watching it, and I found myself so invested with what was happening and in, you know, where we were going with things, and, you know, what was happening with these characters and all of it, that I don't know why I wouldn't give it a 5. Like, and part of that, I think, is like, you know, I think you're right. You know, there's a fanboyness to that, you know. But I'm also going to be okay with being a fanboy because I am a fanboy. Like, I love Star Wars, right? And I love Star Wars, right? And I love all of these stories. I love all the stories that this is building off of. I love all the ways in which we've been, getting these stories. And, this just brings all of that together. And how could I not be excited about that? I like, how could I complain? And so I'm going to go with a 5. So, John,
wow.
If people wanted to catch up with you then and see what you've got going on, where would they find you?
You know what? Before I go, I'm going to change things. I'm going to go with a 5.
Oh, man. What, really?
I'm going to change it. You know what? Because I'm getting too much in my head. I gave it a 4.5 because of mealy mouth. I'm going to change it. It's a 5. And if you want to have a problem with the way I came to that conclusion, you can go ahead and find me as Kessel Junkie online. You can find me lurking around there, primarily on Twitter because I can't quit it. I don't know why. It's like a drug. And you can find me over on the Nerd Party Network. And I'm on 2 shows there. One of them is called House Lights, where we look at the work of directors. That's with Tristan Riddell and Darren Moser. And you can find me over there as well on Aggressive Negotiations, a Star Wars podcast that I co-host with you, Mr. Matthew Rushing.
Well, and I do hope that people will find that show. Of course, you can find me all over social media under the name Matt Rushing02. And you can also find me here on the network with a bunch of other shows: Literary Treks, The Orb, Warp 5, Artificial Tango, and Saddle Up. And outside of Aggressive Negotiations over on the Nerd Party Network, you'll find me doing Owlpost with Drea Kaufman as we talk about Harry Potter one chapter at a time. So thank you, though, so much for joining us, and may the Force be with you.
Mm-hmm.